All right, guys, this is part 4 of our video series. Today, we're going to go over how to install your front sight components. There's 3 pieces, 2 springs, and a detent, along with 2 pins that make up your front sight components here. You have your actual front sight inside the front sight, and this one happens to be stuck, but it still pivots, so we're not going to mess with it. You have your detent inside there, and there's a spring that runs inside this hollow behind that detent. That detent rides in these notches on your pivot. And that pivot, the notches face towards the rear. And you have this spring, which is your front finger spring. This is the front finger. That spring goes up in here. And it gives you tension on this guy to latch your muzzle device. This video, we're also going to cover the rear buffer lock latch installation. So for that, you need the buffer latch itself, its spring, and then it takes, originally they were not roll pins, but we replaced these 2 and the one in the rear with roll pins. Just makes it easier. So these are the roll pins that we use for the front sight. The original style are these pins here, which we're going to go ahead and remove this one. So these are difficult. They're a solid pin with mushroom hollows on the end of them, so you can mushroom them out. By the time you remove them, it becomes a pain in the butt to get these to stay securely under the recoil conditions of these guns. So we replace them with the roll pins. So the first thing we do, like I said, this one is stuck, but it does still spring. So the first thing you want to do is put your spring inside there with your front sight detent. And this front sight actually faces the rear of the gun, which is counterintuitive, and it goes in this first notch here. Some of them are tighter than others. You got to be careful sometimes doing this, because that spring and detent want to fall out on you. You don't have to worry about it in this scenario, but they do. So usually what I do is I'll start with a pin punch like that to get this kind of semi-lined up. We'll back this punch out until it's in this ear, but not hanging out into this slot. That'll give us room to put this guy in. Oops. A lot of time you're fighting the spring tension here, but not today, so there we go. Usually that's a little bit harder to get that to line up, but it wasn't so bad right now. Usually, like I said, you're fighting the spring tension here. This one happens to be stuck, so it's kind of not as bad as it normally is. Then what we'll do is we'll take a second punch, and normally you're having to tension this and all that stuff. We'll take a second punch and run it through that front side. Flip this up like this. Take your punch, and you want to back it out just enough where you can get this guy started. Of course, the spring tension's not wanting to hold this right now. Get that thing started. Then you got a spring. See how there's some spring tension there? That's tensioning back and forth. This guy, the wedge, you got to tension it back and forth with your punch and get it to line up. And that pin to start. Then I take this flat punch drive it in. Usually what you got to do is you're kind of splitting the difference between the two sides. Like right now, and you can't see it from the camera, but we're still in on that side and barely flush on this side, so we'll give that a whack or two. Get it so where it's kind of 50-50 split there. And now your front sight is tensioned in that spring, or in that wedge. So now we take the front finger, which is the muzzle device latch, and we're gonna rock it into its spot here. This particular gun, we actually had to cut all of this out and replace it because the way it was cut, this was all mangled, so it might be a little tight. Looks like that's spread out a little bit. Let me get something to pinch that with. It's just going to be what it is for now. Like I said, this front spring in the wedge pushes up on the back underside of your finger, and that's what gives your finger tension. So we'll get that semi lined up so we can get our punch started there. Usually what I'll do is I'll have a barrel in here. I don't in this particular case, but I'll wedge a screwdriver between the barrel and the bottom side of that wedge to push that wedge up so I can get my pin all the way in, which I may end up needing to do anyway, so hang on there. That just gives me something to tension this screwdriver off of, to push the bottom of that wedge up so I can get it lined up in the holes here enough to get the punch in. Go. And one way you can check that is pivoting your punch and make sure that your pivot is actually moving. And we'll come here to the other side. Oftentimes you got to use this punch to wiggle stuff around and get everything lined up and jiving. Take a flat punch. Oops. You want to make sure that your pin is lining up through your holes. All right, so now what we're going to do is just, oops, yep, see that punched it too far. There we go. It's about even. Now you check it by, of course this one needs to be tight. This one will have to wear in slightly, but this, like I said, we had to, this particular gun, we had to weld all this up, so it's a little bit tighter than some of them, but there's your front latch. Let's see if we can get the rear or front sight to pop. Yep, there we go. So there's your front sight. I said, even though that one was stuck, we were still able to get it to work for us. So next we'll go on to that rear latch. It's pretty easy, but we'll give you a video of it anyways. All right, here we are. Unless your gun was cut funky or whatever, on the rear side, you can have a little divot, hole, semi-hole. Doesn't go all the way through, it stops at the buffer tab. That holds your spring in, keeps your spring from wanting to fly out. On the latch itself, you can see the tit there. You want to line your spring up with that tit. It kind of keeps it from sliding on this side. Just getting that roll pin started on this part so I'm not dropping it. There it is. Get that roll pin started. Now we can go back in here and line everything up. And just whack it with the hammer. There it is. That holds your buffer in place. So now that's on there. Since we already have this gun on the bench here, another really common thing that we find when these guns have been cut through the ratchet plate here at the front, or anywhere in the ratchet plate in this rear section, you'll go to charge the gun. Before it hits this stop, or as it hits this stop, your charging handle right here will travel too far to the rear, and it'll actually get pushed out of the slot and catch on the receiver right here. And the charging handle won't want to go forward. You usually see this on semi-autos, not so much on full auto guns. On full auto guns, the bolt stays to the rear, so there's no tension on the charging handle as it's going back forward. With a semi-auto gun, it's a closed bolt system, so there's constant tension on the bolt and charging handle. So when you come to the rear, it'll go forward, and because there's tension in all of this, it'll kick this tip over just enough where it catches on the receiver right there. Like I said, mostly a semi-auto problem. We do occasionally see it on a full auto gun. The solution to that problem, come on, the solution to that problem is to physically extend the tip of your charging handle. Not this tip, this tip. You want to extend the charging handle up, and that prevents it from kicking to the side and getting stuck on that stop on the receiver right there. You'll get to the rear, and because that bolt is pushing tension forward, it actually kicks the charging handle to the side and it'll catch there. So one problem with extending these charging handles, the way the barrel reciprocates in here, the entire barrel assembly reciprocates to the rear. So that barrel will reciprocate and it'll physically hit that tip and cause this bolt or this charging handle to unlatch, and it'll take a lot of energy out of the system. So your gun, we see it with full auto guns where these wobble and shake, and in some of the other videos you can see that with us testing them. You'll see the charging handle popping back and it'll cause the gun to light primer, even in a full auto gun where it's slamming that buddy home. So if your recuperator and your barrel reciprocating comes to the rear and is smacking, then your charging handle, the tit you made, is too long and you'll have to fit it back. So that there's a happy medium in there where you've got to find where your bolt's not, or your barrel's not reciprocating into your charging handle, but your charging handle's also not pulling out of the slot. That's a really common issue that we see. And trying to explain that to guys sometimes, they think you're talking about extending here. So on a semi-auto gun, this arm gets shortened because it's got to clearance the hammer inside the bolt carrier, or inside the grip stick, inside the bolt, whatever. So this arm gets shortened to clearance the hammer so that it slides back and forth and isn't just smacking on your hammer. But this tip here extending it this direction is where we actually want to be. That'll help resolve that problem. Oftentimes I'll get guys, man, I yanked the crap out of this, and when I did, the bolt got stuck and it won't go back to the back forward. So what's happening is that bolt comes to the rear, and as you whack the crap out of it, the bolt actually pushes the buffer spring slightly and tensions it, and then it kicks this arm out. So you're fighting the recoil spring tension, the buffer tension, and all of that is pushed your charging handles to the side, and it's wedged right there in the receiver. You can take a punch or something, and one thing you want to be careful though is if you do it like I'm holding right now, this thing immediately flies forward and it's going to smack you. So you just got to be cautious of that. One thing you don't want to do, or you can do, but you really don't want to do, is pull your buttstock off. Problem with that is all that spring tension, that spring's going to fly and smack you in the face, or throw your buttstock across the floor and crack your buttstock, yada yada yada. So you really don't want to pull your buttstock off with your bolt stuck to the rear, even in a full auto gun. That recoil spring just pops out of there like a jack-in-the-box. So not something you want to do. You want to make sure that your charging handle's forward and your bolt is forward before you go removing that stock assembly. But if your bolt is stuck to the rear, especially on a semi-auto gun, it's stuck right here, usually. Sometimes it'll be your hammer isn't quite clearance right, or not your hammer, your charging handle isn't quite clearance right, and it's catching on that hammer. But 99% of the time, you're getting caught right there in that corner. Your charging handle's kicked out just enough, boom, that it hits that hard stop right there, and it jams everything to the rear. So that's the fix there. Extend your charging handle. I don't have one to show you. We've used them all currently, but that's one thing that you can watch for. One thing we can talk about while I've got you in this position. When you fit your cam section, which is what this is, people call it a trunnion, but it's not, it's a camming section. When you fit this camming section, you've got to make sure that it's square this direction and it's square this direction all at the same time. Because if it's like this or like that, or if it's sitting one way or the other and not square and perpendicular with your receiver, your bolt gets jammed up inside your recuperator or your camming section there. So that's one thing to watch for. Another thing, if this is cocked too far forward, when you go to fit your top cover, you'll come down to about right here, and there'll be a lot of tension to get your top cover closed. You see how that one basically just falls? There's not a feed tray in here right now. Usually when you get to about right here, you'll start to have a little bit of tension. And what that is your feed arm inside here, your lever arm, pressure arm, whatever you want to call it, is hitting the feed tray. And there's actually, let me show you. So this part in your feed tray right here is what pushes up against that right there. Is what pushes up against that pressure arm. So almost as you get it closed, there should be a little bit of pressure there to close it. But if you're really having to force this top cover down to get it to latch into place, chances are your camming section is askew one direction or the other, and it's throwing off. Because obviously if your camming section is more like this, you know, your top cover is going to want to be like that instead of like that. So that's one thing you can watch for, is when you fit these cams. And when you fit these cams, you want them to be pretty tight. Sometimes there's a little bit of slop there, but you want them to be as tight as you possibly can. The more this thing moves around, especially with a full auto gun, as that bolt and barrel reciprocate, this wobbles around and it'll actually wear the receiver out and crack and cause other problems. But another thing that we see, this rear portion here, from slamming and slamming and slamming and slamming and slamming, these two levers, these two latches on your top cover will actually eat grooves in the sheet metal. We've had to repair miniguns that's the case, and your top cover will want to pop open because those grooves are just worn there. One of the other things we see a lot of times when we put these in the jigs and weld it, we're using the rail holes, or the rails, to space these sections. Now the jig has an overall length, but there's still some slide back and forth. So you could actually make it too short here and too long here or whatever. But oftentimes what we'll find, once you get this thing overall length and everything seems to be jiving good and you get your recuperator and your rails in and you're cruising right along, all of a sudden you go to fit your top cover, and your top cover, no matter what you do, won't go in. You got two things that are possible besides this, keeping your top cover open. You've got these latches can need to be shortened. Like if you push this forward and they're not clearing this back section here, you can fit these hooks just a little bit to get them to clear where it'll pop in and close. But another thing that we see, this arm that rides inside your top cover, this will be hitting right here. And when this is hitting right here, it'll cause feed issues because this arm, put it back on the top cover, this arm moves back and forth, and that's actually what physically advances your belt and feeds your ammo over. So if this is hitting this, it's not going to feed right. So sometimes what we'll have to do, like I said, these things have been cut, so you're not ever going to get it exactly right where it was. So sometimes what you got to do, pull this back out, is shorten the end of it. And I'll just hit it on the belt sander over there and just shorten this end just to give yourself some clearance here. But that's the common issue that we find building these. We build them every single week, so that's a common thing that we see. Where did that pin go? There it is. Top cover fitting. So another thing that we see all the time, and this goes back to if this camming section is askew, you go to fit your feed tray will drop and it'll be sitting up like that. Maybe not that dramatic, but it'll be sitting up. So when you go to close this, you're physically putting pressure and bending your feed tray at this joint right here to get it to close. When that happens, it's putting a lot of pressure on your ammunition as it tries to feed through here because of all the tension and everything, and you'll have feed issues. We see that quite often. But if you see this one, it falls right down flush with the receiver, so it's good to go. This gun runs fine. I'll put a little testing video of this particular gun. This morning I was putting those components on so we could send it out for refinish. This is a post sample that we rebuilt for another dealer. This receiver was built, but it was never actually ran, and whoever built it did a terrible job, terrible job. So we had to cut it all back apart and redo it. But lots of fitting in the camming sections on these, especially because they're cut, and most of the time they're cut through the camming area, through the camming window over here. So sometimes we run into this too. It'll be too short here, like I said earlier, and your cam won't fit in the window. Well, you don't want to fit that window open because that's shifting where this cam sits in relation to your barrel stop and the head of your recuperator piston and that kind of stuff. So if you check your overall length, and your overall length is 37 5/8, plus or minus an eighth, but you're not fitting here with your cam window, your cam won't go into the window, chances are you're too short here and you're too long somewhere else. So your overall length is correct, but your actual spacing of where this stuff is supposed to be is off. This particular gun was that way. We were too long in the rear and too short here, and we had to chop both of these back apart and get the length back here to get everything to jive. One of the other things we've seen on a semi-auto that we did last week Everything was good. We put it all back together, tested it tested just fine. But when you would take the receiver and tip it back and forth like this, the barrel that was shifting, dink, 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 which means it wasn't sitting up against the recuperator head like it should. There should be just a little bit of tension when that barrel comes down and pushes that recuperator head out of the way. And that keeps your barrel and your recuperator under tension in the cycle action. So if your barrel is coming off and able to move past the tip of your recuperator in here, your length is too long here. And that's the case that we had last week. So we had to cut it here, and get the lengths right so that that particular gun, the barrel, was sitting on the recuperator properly. What that can cause, if your recuperator or your barrel is able to push past your recuperator, is under cycling conditions, that barrel can be too far forward for the bolt to actually latch properly, and can cause some out of battery detonations and different stuff. Because this cam, let me find a cam. This cam, let's see if you can see it. Yep, there we go. This cam, this is actually where the rollers push out into. So if your barrel's too far forward, it'll actually push the rollers back in and slightly unlock your barrel. So you want to make sure that your spacing is correct. Otherwise you end up with issues and out of battery chances. A lot of these little small nuance things, these guns have been cut in multiple places all over the place. I think this particular gun is, most of the receiver is one gun, but it was missing the rear chunk. So this is from a different gun. So it got fit and whatever. There's another one over there on the shelf that the shroud is Yugo and the rear end is MG42, and then this section's Yugo, or this section's Yugo, and this section, like, it's a bunch of different receivers that we're having to mash all back into one. So sometimes your spacing isn't exactly where it needs to be, and you have to compensate for that. I'm not going to go giving you dimensions, oh, this should be whatever from this or whatever, because these guns aren't precision like that. There are variances in these guns and these receivers, yada, yada, yada. So when you run into different issues like that, these guys that want to drop an FRT in these things, well, A, the semi-auto bolt carrier of an MG42 is not like the semi-auto bolt carrier of an AR-15. So this isn't just magically going to trip your FRT at the right time. At the same time, if your barrel sits slightly too far forward or slightly too far back, and you try timing this, or if the barrel is sticking slightly on your recuperator or inside your cam, and the gun goes off because the FRT is letting it go off out of cycle, you have a high probability of out of battery detonations. So yeah, the main reason we don't recommend them is because A, I can't do the R&D on them to say, okay, this is what you need to do. But B, it's not a drop-in. It's not like, you can't take a trigger pack and just drop it in one of these things from an AR-15, even though it uses AR-15 fire control components, and just run it like you would an AR-15. They're not precision machines like that. So every individual gun is fit individually from the guys that are doing this. But there's too many variables within this system that we do not recommend FRTs. Sure, guys are making it work, and maybe you'll be fine, maybe you won't. But when you mushroom your receiver, you just ruined a $10,000 gun. And it's going to cost you thousands of dollars to repair it. So I understand why guys want to do it, but there's a lot of factors within this system, especially in a semi-auto gun, that it's just not a good idea to FRT these things. We get that question 5 times a week. I've done other videos on it, but that's a quick down and dirty rundown. Yeah, they're banned in the state of Florida, so we can't even R&D them. That's kind of beside the point. The real point is, like I said, if this barrel, if your length is off slightly here, and the barrel has the opportunity to go an eighth further forward, well, now your rollers are pushed slightly in on your camming section, and all of a sudden your FRT is dumping you at 1,200 rounds a minute, or whatever the FRT capacity is. And the chances of that bolt bouncing or whatever and causing out of battery detonations are up there. So, not the answer that everybody wants to hear about the FRTs, but it is what it is. So, that'll probably do for today's video. That went over front sight install, rear buffer tab install, common charging handle and popping out and jamming issues here, some common top cover fitment issues, and then a little bit more blip on that FRT. I keep bringing the FRT thing up because I keep getting the questions multiple times a week. Multiple guys comment on these videos. Can we do an FRT? Can you retrofit a pre-built gun into an FRT? I mean, yeah, it can be done, but no, we don't recommend it. So that'll do it for this video. Stay tuned and we'll do some more. So y'all have a good day.